Did you know that one of the most famous prophecies about Jesus depends solely on a word that does not appear in the Hebrew? Welcome back to Pesky Passages. This is Lost in Translation, where every translative choice is an interpretation, and those choices shape your theology. Okay, Psalm 22, verse 16. Let's just read it. They pierced my hands and my feet. They have pierced my hands and my feet. My hands and my feet have shriveled. They bound my hands and my feet. Like a lion, they maul my hands and my feet. Same verse in every instance. Some sound like it predicts Jesus. The others don't even come close. So where did this idea of pierced come from? Because this one word carries the entire weight of the idea of this being a prophecy. Without it, you're just reading a poem about someone suffering. But with it, you have the prediction of crucifixion thousands of years before it would take place. That is a lot of pressure on one word. Let's see if it holds up. In the Hebrew Masoretic Text, which is the authoritative Jewish text, the word is ka'ari, and it means like a lion, not pierced. And that fits because the entire psalm describes enemies as animals. Bulls in verse 12, lions in verse 13, dogs right here in verse 16. And the line literally reads, like a lion at my hands and feet. It's strange grammar, sure, but it's consistent within the poetry. And just a few verses later, we get supporting evidence that this is the better read. In verses 20 and 21, the petition section, the psalmist cries out to God, save me from the dog, rescue me from the mouth of the lion. Same animals, same order, same dog and lion parallel. The petition is answering the lament, calling back to the exact threats in verse 16. But if you swap like a lion for pierced, that parallelism breaks. The poem stops echoing itself. Now, some scholars may point to a Dead Sea Scroll fragment that may read ka'aru. The word is actually unclear, and it may end in a different final letter. And that would give us the verb from the root kara. But even if kara were correct, it still doesn't mean pierced. It means to dig. Every time it shows up in the Hebrew Bible, it's digging out wells, digging out pits, digging out graves, never stabbing, never penetrating.
Not a good enough reason to use the word penetrate.
When Hebrew wants to say pierced, it uses the word dakar, like in Zechariah 12:10. But that word doesn't appear anywhere in Psalm 22. So even the best manuscript argument gets you to they dug at, not they pierced. So here's most likely what happened. The New Testament writers quoted portions of Psalm 22 when telling the crucifixion story, which would have been a common Jewish practice at the time. They heard echoes of older suffering in new experiences, not prediction, resonance. But later translators worked backwards. They already believed the psalm was about Jesus, so they translated it to make it sound like it was. Like a lion became pierced, not because the Hebrew changed, but because the theology demanded it. So let's take a second to consider the implications. One of the most commonly cited prophecies for the crucifixion doesn't actually exist in the Hebrew. The word pierced was installed by translators who already believed the conclusion. And the biggest problem is that the reader never sees any of this. They open their Bible, they read, pierced my hands and my feet, and they think, well, obviously this is a prediction about Jesus. But that obviously was manufactured. It was placed there by a translation committee, not a psalmist. And if translators can build a crucifixion into a psalm that's really just about a man crying out to God for help, it also means we have to be responsible in what translation we choose. Now, none of this means that Psalm 22 is not meaningful. It's actually one of the most powerful prayers in the Bible, as it actually is, not as what translators needed it to be or what we may want it to be. So when you study, compare translations. If one says pierced and another says like a lion, and yet another says Hebrew uncertain in the footnotes, that's the evidence that there's something more going on behind the scenes. So remember, the next time someone says the Bible clearly predicted Jesus' crucifixion in the Psalms, clarity is often curated. And if you find this as interesting as I do, and you want to learn more, come along, you're welcome here.